Very mechanical.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. Thanks, Ellen, for organising this. And I'm really thrilled to be talking about Goodreads research that I've been doing. I find Goodreads fascinating, and it's kind of ever evolving and ever getting more interesting and complicated. So I'm keen to hear what you think about this research and about a little bit about how you use Goodreads yourselves. So just to introduce myself, I'm a senior lecturer in the Publishing, Communications and Arts Management programs at the University of Melbourne. So that means that I teach students who are doing master's degrees in either arts management or book publishing and communications. And my research has been mostly in the area of the publishing industry and reading practices and how they're influencing each other, and particularly the role that digitisation is playing in both publishing practices and in the changing reading practices that we're seeing. So at the moment, I'm a chief investigator on 2 Australian Research Council discovery projects. The first one is Genre Worlds, Australian Popular Fiction in the 21st Century, and I'm on a team there with Associate Professor Kim Wilkins, Associate Professor Lisa Fletcher and Professor David Carter. And that project is really coming to its end now, but it's involved a lot of interviews with writers of genre fiction, but also publishers and people who run writing groups and events for authors and readers, and looking at kind of how those genres have evolved in the 21st century, particularly fantasy, romance fiction and crime. So that's given me kind of, I guess, one set of insights into how books and book culture are changing, you know, particularly in the last decade. And then the other project focuses even more specifically on digital change. And that's New Tastemakers in Australia's post-digital literary culture. That's with Associate Professor Mark Davis, Dr. Sybil Nolan and Dr. Emmett Stinson. And that one started a year later, so we're still really in the thick of doing the research for that project. That word post-digital there, it's a little bit playful to suggest that, you know, we've had a lot of talk about digital, but what's coming next. But it also is I guess, an academic word where it's being used to mean not after the digital, but that kind of messy condition we find ourselves in now, where digital and print or live events are all mingled together. And an example that I sometimes use to explain what I mean by post-digital is a series of emails where Instagram is influencing book cover design, because people who use Instagram want to be able to take beautiful pictures of books and upload them to Instagram. It's actually changing the way book covers are being designed so that they photograph particularly well. Bold typography and contrasting colours, for example. So that's an example of digital influencing print. So post-digital doesn't mean print goes away. People still love smelling books and holding books and, you know, buying print books or reading print books, but digital is kind of woven into it in interesting ways. And I think Goodreads is one of the ways that that's happening. So Goodreads, Ellen mentioned that some of you already use Goodreads and others would know about it. Goodreads is a very complex and busy website. Every time I go in and check the numbers, they're bigger. Oops, sorry, that's a message thing. I thought I'd quit out of that. So sorry, I'll go back to present. So it currently has 85 million members and 2.5 billion books that have been catalogued or uploaded. So you can create a kind of virtual library on Goodreads to show your book collection to the world. And those 85 million members between them have written 87 million reviews. So that is a lot. To me, that's a lot of new data about readers and their preferences and their reading experiences, and a real wealth, I think. It's actually almost too many reviews to know what to do with. We don't really have the tools to read all 87 million reviews, but what I've been doing is pursuing a kind of case study based approach where I pick a book and look at the reviews for that book and then pick another book and look at those reviews, and gradually I'm building up a sense of how readers are using this website. One interesting thing about Goodreads is that it's been owned by Amazon since 2015. So it started off as an independent website run by Otis and Elizabeth Chandler, and it had a real community feel. And there was a lot of community distress when it was bought by Amazon. However, So far, Amazon seems to be leaving it as an independent site, so its look and feel still feels quite different to the Amazon website. But to me, it's incontrovertible that Amazon would be using the data from Goodreads, particularly the star ratings and the reviews, the product reviews are filtering into the Amazon sphere of world domination, such as it is. Another interesting thing about Goodreads to me is that it's very much a reader-centered website. So I wrote a book chapter for a book that was published in 2016 about a controversy involving the author Kathleen Hale. I don't know if that's one that you came across. It's often controversial when authors get involved on Goodreads, responding to bad reviews of their book in particular. The general advice to authors is to stay off Goodreads, but some of them don't seem to be able to help checking, and I can understand that temptation, knowing that there's all these user reviews there, and then responding is a kind of a step further. What happened in the Kathleen Hale controversy is that she got a particular one-star review that really upset her, and she tracked down the reviewer who wrote that review. Even though the review was under a pseudonym, she managed to get the person's home address, and she went to the person's home, and then she wrote an article about it for The Guardian about, you know, the time I hit rock bottom and stalked a Goodreads reviewer, and that was very controversial online. And she's now publishing a book of essays, including kind of further elaboration about the time she stalked a Goodreads reviewer. So that was a real flashpoint in online discussions of what Goodreads should be for and who should be getting involved there. So it's controversial when authors are involved in Goodreads, even though they sort of have a presence in terms of doing Q&As and chats. But there is definitely a role for organisations on Goodreads, and especially reader-centred organisations such as libraries. And I've seen lots of reviews by librarians or by library accounts, and then sometimes a named librarian within them. And those very much fit, I think, with that ethos of the Goodreads reviews being a service to other readers. As an academic, as I said, I'm fascinated by Goodreads because it provides access to a kind of reading experience that's previously been quite elusive, which is just knowing what readers think of the books that they read. I do acknowledge that not every reader would write an online review. It's a subset of readers. But I think the millions who do occupy a really interesting position in book culture, and it's a new position because in the past, we've kind of had to infer what readers think without having direct access. So I think Goodreads has offered readers a new venue or forum or a role where they can be active mediators of texts in book culture. I've put here, we do know that 75% of the users of Goodreads are women. Most of them come from America, as far as I can tell, although it's gradually becoming more international. So the research I want to tell you about mostly today comes from an article that was published a few months ago in the journal Qualitative Inquiry, and I wrote it with my research partner, Professor Danelle Rieberg-Sedo. She's the author of several works on reading practices that you might be interested in. There's a book called From Reading Communities from Salons to Cyberspace, and a book that she wrote with Danielle Fuller, Reading Beyond Book, about mass reading events, so one book, one city type of events. And we looked together at Goodreads reviews for 7 best-selling Australian and Canadian books. How did we choose the books that we looked at? It comes from a larger research project that she and I are engaged in. She's based in Canada, and we were interested in the way books from Canada were received in Australia and books from Australia were received in Canada. So we went through the bestseller lists, 10 years worth of bestseller lists between Canada and Australia, looking for books from each other's countries, and we only found 7, which shows, I think, the dominance of US and UK titles on bestseller lists. And these are the 7 books, if you can see them. Tim Flannery's The Weathermakers, Jan Martel's The Life of Pi, Kate Morton's Forgotten Garden, Graham Simsion's The Rosie Project, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now and A New Earth. I did not realise he was Canadian until I looked through these books. And Marcus Suzak's The Book Thief, which my research partner had no idea was Australian. So that was interesting. And because we were interested in that transnational reception, we filtered the Goodreads reviews. So we only looked at Australians who were writing about Canadian books and Canadians who were writing about Australian books. And that left us with a data set of about 700 reviews that we closely read to analyse in terms of the kinds of things readers were interested in and the way they responded to these different books. I will note that although there were 700 overall, it was really uneven. Some books tend to get a lot more reviews than others, and we can probably infer a little bit about which books tend to get more reviewed. I mean, The Weathermakers had hardly any reviews, and that's, I think, because it was published in 2003. And so all of the Goodreads reviews were people reflecting back on earlier reading, or when they catalogued all their books, they'd put that one up with a little description. But when a book comes out now, like the Rosie Project in 2013, you know, when you read the book on the Kindle and then it prompts you to go to Goodreads and leave a review, Goodreads is much more kind of woven into that moment of reception now. And so I think the more recent books get more reviews. And there's also a little bit, I think, about some genres. So YA and romance books tend to get a lot of reviews, literary fiction often not so much. So those are the books, and I'll jump now to our findings. So what we did is we went through and we read all 700 of those reviews, and we coded them in a giant spreadsheet where we just noticed things that were present in the language of each review. And the first thing we looked for was whether the books evaluated, and whether the reviews, evaluated the books. Now, you know that Goodreads forces you to put in a star rating, so there's that evaluation embedded in that forced hierarchy. But a lot of reviews also use what we think described as evaluative language. This is a good book, this is a bad book, this book is well written, this book is badly written. And we found overall that 70.1% of the reviews evaluated the book in this way. And I've got a few examples that I was going to read to you here. Oh yeah, so some of the reviewers showed a really keen understanding of the evaluative role that they were playing when they wrote a review. They took it really seriously. This one review of Life of Pi, which I loved, began tossed and turned about whether to give it 4 or 5 stars. And you can tell that reviewer is really kind of angsting over whether it's a 4-star or a 5-star book and taking that role seriously. The highest percentage of evaluative reviews, 83.3%, was for Life of Pi. And Nell and I found that really interesting. This is the most critically acclaimed literary title in the set that we looked at. It's a Man Booker Prize winner. And our results suggest that readers might be conditioned to respond to these kind of serious books in an evaluative way, especially if they're prize winners and they want to either agree with the judges or disagree with the judges. Another example of an evaluative review for Life of Pi was this one. What an amazingly thrilling book to read. The book is wonderfully written. The lowest percentage of evaluative reviews came for The Power of Now. That was only 64.9% of its reviews offered an evaluation of it. And I think that this might relate to its genre as a self-help book. So it's not really a book that's inviting you to say whether it's wonderfully written or not. It's a book that it's not necessarily there for its aesthetic qualities or its prose. It's there as a more useful book to see if it can help you with your life. So evaluation is clearly a part of activity on Goodreads, and it might be that the core of the typical Goodreads reviews is whether the reader likes the book or not, whether they think it's a good book or not. And that sort of fits with the way we're all trained these days to leave reviews for everything from our Uber drivers to our hotel stays. We're all kind of conditioned to give stars and say whether things are good or not. We're customer service models. But what intrigued me was that reviews often do more than this on Goodreads. They're not just there to evaluate a product. For example, one review of Eckhart Tolle's The New Earth. Oh, I forgot to say, we treated those books, we bundled their reviews together because they're very similar books and they hit the bestseller list at the exact same time when Oprah picked up both of them. So they really were the kind of one book, one publishing phenomenon. Anyway, so one review of A New Earth shows this way that evaluation shades into something more interesting. Here's the review. Thought this book was bloody brilliant, changed my life in some ways. I was certainly down on my luck when I read it, and it couldn't have been more perfect for such a book to appear at such a grim period in my life. I would credit it as part of my solution. So that review begins with an evaluative judgment. It's bloody brilliant, but then it really links this to the life experiences of the reader. So it's not just a critical act saying whether it's a good or bad book, it's a personal act and showing how the book fitted into the reader's life. And in a slightly different register, there's a review of the Rosie Project that reads, I give this book 4.8 stars out of 5. That just makes me laugh. I really enjoy it when people are very precise in their star ratings. I really enjoyed this book. I read it in a day because I was so in love with the characters. I adored the two main characters, Rosie and Don. What a unique and beautiful love story, must read. So again, here we have evaluation, the very precise 4.8 stars out of 5. And readers on Goodreads quite often use the text to break down the star rating into finer detail. They feel like there's a lot of difference between 4 and 5 stars and they want to be more precise. But that review also talks about what it felt like to read the book, including its emotional impact, being in love with the characters and finding it a beautiful story. So in responses like that, evaluation edges into something more intimate. And this became even more evident when we examined experiential language in reviews. So we went through the 700 reviews and we looked for language that described a reading experience, what it felt like to read the book. And this was more common, much more common really, than evaluative language. Most of the reviews we coded described a reading experience, and the percentage was really high for the Rosie Project, where it was 90.8% of reviews described what it felt like to read the book, and for The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton, 90.2%. So I think from the standpoint of readers, describing a reading experience links the book not to objective or external criteria, should it win a prize, is it well written, but instead to their lived experience as readers. And the way they articulate these experiences is similar to what we've seen in other research on book clubs and how people talk about books in book clubs, and I'm sure you would have experience of these different kinds of language as well. When we looked at the kind of experience that people were talking about, the most common was their emotional experience. So 68% of reviews specifically mentioned an emotional reaction to the book. There was considerable variation between the titles in our set. 85.6% of reviews for Rosie Project talked about the emotions of the reader, but less than 22% of readers for The Weather Makers, Tim Flannery's climate change book, and Life of Pi, that literary fiction prize-winning book. The small amounts of the reviews for those books talked about emotion. So that was quite interesting to me, that the descriptions for emotion were more common in reviews for general fiction than for literary fiction and non-fiction. We analysed further. I don't have the stats up for this, but we looked at the kinds of emotions they talked about. The most common was enjoyment. That was frequently mentioned. Of all of our reviews, 42% of reviewers described enjoying the book, often just saying, I really enjoyed this book. But another 16% articulated amusement, like I found this funny or quirky, or I laughed a lot. And that was most common for the Rosie Project. But there were small numbers of reviews that expressed disappointment with a book, or sadness, or being annoyed by a book. Those were quite small, sort of 3 and 4% of reviews. We also coded for what I called multiple non-specific emotion, and that was about 6% of reviews. And under this category, we coded things like, I felt very emotional reading this book was very moving, or an example is, looking for a great book that will make you feel warm and fuzzy all over, then let me introduce you to the Rosie Project. And I thought that was interesting because it's kind of what they call in internet parlance these days, all the feels. So they wanted to communicate that it was an emotional book, but they weren't breaking it down into which emotion. Another thing we noticed as we were looking at emotion in the reviews is that over a quarter of all reviews use some kind of version of the word love, either loved or loving. And to me, that's interesting that that word, which, that's quite a strong emotional word, that it would be so common in reviews on Goodreads. It was most common in reviews of The Forgotten Garden, The Rosie Project, and The Book Thief. In addition to close reading the reviews, and I won't go into this too much now, but if you've got questions, feel free to ask me. We also ran the reviews through a sentiment analysis software program. And what sentiment analysis does is it compares the words in the reviews to a list of words that have been predefined as emotion-bearing words, and they've been given scores. So a word like light gets a score of 1, love gets a score of 2, and that can tell you then which books attracted the strongest emotion, and it does that for both positive emotion and negative emotion. And we found that The Book Thief had both the strongest positive emotional language used in its reviews and the strongest negative emotion. And we would suggest that that's because The Book Thief deals with very upsetting historical events. You know, it's set during World War II, and so people were moved by, you know, and saddened by those events, but they also really loved the book and the characters. So it's kind of an intense emotional experience in both a positive and negative way to read that book. One other thing that we did when we were coding, I'll just say it here, is that we looked for accounts of the material book and the physical reading experience, and that's because academics who study emotion often argue that emotions are very connected to the body, and we were interested in whether that was true for reviewers. We didn't find that it was very common at all for readers to describe their physical experience of reading the book. The most common thing was talking about laughing out loud during the Rosie Project, which we were interested in because that's quite an extreme reaction. And some reviewers will talk about reading on the bus or reading in bed, but not very many. The materiality of the book, so whether people are reading a print book or an e-book or listening to an audio book, came up in about 7% of reviews, so that's not that many, which to me suggests that the materiality of reading isn't a priority for most Goodreads reviews. Mostly they're more keen to talk about this emotional engagement they had with the book. Okay, so a thing that we found was quite common was people using Goodreads reviews to create social connections. And you know, Goodreads is a kind of social media where you can follow other reviewers and reply to their reviews and create friendship groups or discussion forums. And we did find that many reviews, so in addition to being on a social media platform, many reviews make social connections in their text. So we coded for reviews that explicitly address other readers, often using the second person, you, like you will love this book if you also like that. Some examples were reviews that recommended or didn't recommend the book. Some reviews included warnings to readers, like spoiler alert, and some reviews included suggestions of how readers might like to read the book. For example, would make a perfect beach book. So more than a quarter of our reviews addressed a future reader. Sometimes this takes the form of a direct address, like, I recommend this to everyone I can, as I do to you who is reading this review. Just go for it, smiley face. That was a review of A New Earth. Sometimes it's shout outs to specific readers. A review of The Book Thief reads, amazing book, I laughed and cried. Diana, Sarah, Megan and Rachel, you would all love this book. And the sense of imagining the next reader is also present in descriptions of ideal ways to read a particular book. And a review of The Forgotten Garden says, this is a lovely book, best read cuddled into a warm chair, preferably with a cat on your lap. And so that's reviewers talking to other readers. A lot of reviews also mention the author, and this is another place where we found a really big difference between the books. Overall, about 20% of reviews mention the author, but it was most common for reviews of books by Eckhart Tolle and by Kate Morton. For Tolle, I think this suggests that the success of his books is linked to his own profile as a celebrity, a kind of a guru status that he has. He appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show and runs retreats and webinars and so on. So I think he's really at the centre of the success of those books. For Kate Morton, I think different factors might be at work. We were interested to see that Kate Morton is actually the only female author in those 7 best-selling titles. As a general fiction title, her book occupies a similar position in the industry to Zuzak's and Simpson's, but readers are much more likely to mention her name, and in particular, they're much more likely to use her first name. So 57.1% of Kate Morton's reviews mention her first name. And so I would suggest that maybe from the reader's point of view, there's a feeling of greater familiarity with female authors. or a sense of a connection there somehow. And then a third kind of a social connection formed through reviews is mentioning the characters. Now, previous research on book clubs has suggested that readers often identify with a character, but we found that that wasn't very common. And it mostly happened for the Rosie Project, but it was only about 2% of reviews said, I identify with this character. The ones who did it was often because the main character of the Rosie Project has undiagnosed Asperger's syndrome, and so readers who also had that diagnosis or those experiences would say whether they identified or not. It was much more common for people to draw links between characters and people in their lives. So Don reminded me of my old professor, or Don reminded me of my friend's husband. Don was actually central to many Goodreads accounts of the Rosie Project. Those reviews were very focused on him as a character. Lots of people compared him to Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, which I thought was really interesting, comparing one fictional character from a book with a fictional character from a TV show and kind of bringing them together on an online website to create a multimedia, intertext. So, yeah, I think the references to the characters show readers making connections and linking people up. One of the things I liked was people not necessarily saying they recognised a character, but that they felt the character had become a friend of theirs. So I was really rooting for this character, or I fell in love with this character, or I wanted this character to succeed. And I think that's a really kind of strong imaginative act, and something that readers tend to do. I think it's a kind of a way readers talk to other readers. Did you love this character? And then finally, we looked to see if there was any mention about how readers discovered the book. And I thought that might be interesting to you as librarians. And some readers do mention librarians or booksellers who recommend the book, and then they either blame them or give them credit for the reading experience they had. Or they might mention family members or book clubs. So, 8.7%, it's not nothing, but it's not a huge number. And it'd be interesting to see how that went for different kinds of books. Actually, I'll tell you about this project in a minute, but just to summarise that bit of research, I think reading has always involved different forms of social activity and different forms of private activity, and I think websites kind of blur the lines between these in interesting ways. So you might take a personal reading experience that you've had and write about it in the privacy of your own home, but then you're sharing that with the world, and you're often using it, I think, to make connections with other people. So I think Goodreads is a really interesting space in that way, for the way it brings together kind of private reading experiences with more social ones. Just in the last few minutes, I wanted to tell you about a new project I'm doing with Emmett Stinson. And we're looking at the Goodreads reviews of Alexis Wright's The Swan book, which you may be familiar with. I think it's a 2013 book, and it's quite an experimental prose work, so very, very literary, but it's also set in the near future in which climate change has wreaked havoc on Australia. So it's a speculative fiction work too, and it kind of blurs that line between genre fiction and literary fiction. And we were interested in it because it is quite a challenging book to read, and we were interested in how Goodreads users responded to that. And our preliminary findings indicate that there are some key ways in which readers respond to the difficulty of the Swan book on Goodreads. There is one group of readers who perhaps are quite highbrow readers, and they see the difficulty as a sign of quality. So good books should be difficult books, and they'll compare it to James Joyce's Ulysses and so on. And that's something that some people kind of absorb at university, that difficult books are important. Then there are some readers who hate difficult books and feel really annoyed with them. Often these were readers who picked up the book thinking it was speculative fiction work, or that they would be able to enjoy in the way that they've enjoyed other speculative fiction works. And they got quite annoyed with the book. But then there was another set who didn't fit into either easy category, and these are the readers that I was, really interested in myself. Readers who are like, well, let's see what it's like. I'll give it a try, and they kind of remain open-minded and open-ended about the difficulty of the book. And then once they've identified this difficulty, one of the things we found about Goodreads reviewers is that they tend to treat the difficulty of the book as a shared problem for the Goodreads community. So often they'll refer to or link to professional reviews to kind of back up what they're writing in their own reviews or point people to what someone else has said. But then they might ask for or offer help to other users on the site. Some examples I have here. One person wrote, "Keep persevering if you're struggling through the swan. It's worth it in the end." So that's directly addressing some hypothetical future reader and giving them some encouragement. Another reviewer, though, wrote, quote, "Save yourself the trouble and throw this book out." So that was a reader saying, it's not going to get better, just throw it out and give up. And actually in a similar review said, "I don't know where to start except to suggest that if the opening doesn't grab you, you'd best put the book down. It's not going to be watered down anywhere." I think that was a reviewer trying to help other readers by giving them a taste for what the reading experience would be like. So I found that really interesting that the Goodreads was kind of operating as a peer readers advisory group, perhaps, where they were helping each other with a book that readers might find challenging. So that's everything that I wanted to share with you about my research on Goodreads, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about what you've noticed as you use it and any questions that you might have about the research I've done. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Beth. That was fascinating. It's interesting hearing about it from a different perspective.
Great. Well, I can't wait to hear from your perspective.
Do people have any questions or comments? Those online, maybe if you put it in your chat, please. Those in the room, any questions or comments?
Why do you say authors shouldn't be on Goodreads? Because I find a lot of the books I review for Australian authors, I get a comment straight away of the author.
Oh, yeah.
And they seem to like that interaction.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, one of the exciting things about online is the promise it offers that readers can communicate with authors and feel closer to the authors that they admire. As we saw with the Kate Morton reviews, that can be important, that sense of connection for some reviewers. I think it has a lot of potential to go wrong. Yeah, I've seen particularly when readers feel like they're writing to other readers, to have the author come in over the top with a different interpretation or with hurt feelings can be a bit confronting for the readers. And I think I don't know, there's tension, isn't there, between wanting the author to let go of the book so the reader can have an experience with it, but then also wanting to feel that connection to an author you admire. So I think when it goes wrong, it goes really badly wrong, which is why I think authors are advised not to get involved. But, there's potential too. Have you seen good examples of the interactions happening? Or?
Well, I reviewed the Rosie Project and the second one, and then Text Publishing sent me the third one to review because they like my reviews, and then the author said, "Yes, I wanted that title as well that I suggested," and so it was really nice to hear back from him.
Yeah. Oh, I have a story about Graham Simpson too, because I was presenting a conference paper on the Rosie Project, and someone was live tweeting it, and he disagreed with something that I'd said, and so weighed in on Twitter to correct my interpretation. So in the middle of a conference, so that was interesting too. There you go.
Yes, it possibly depends on how positive or negative the review is. Because yours were positive, it's not a problem for the authors. Yes, it probably requires a fairly thick skin to be able to participate as an author, but also at times to know when it's things off the keyboard time.
Yeah.
I have a question coming through. Amy online has commented that I appreciate authors' reviews of other books, but I agree that they to stay away from reviews of their own books.
Oh, that's a good point. That kind of, and it's true that the line between reader and author can be pretty blurry sometimes because authors read books too and they're passionately involved. There's an interesting example of the Dear Author blog. I don't know if you know that one. It's a romance fiction blog, and it was run, had a very strong line as being for readers by readers, but then it turned out that the blogger who ran it was also an author under a pseudonym and had reviewed her own book and not disclosed that, and so it all got a bit murky.
Yes, and Amy went on to comment, when I review books on Goodreads, I'm being honest about how I feel about it. If I had negative feelings, I'd probably say it differently if I knew the author was reading it.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, you go, Ellen.
I was going to say, I actually think that maybe the author may be reading it, so I'm quite cautious, but it doesn't mean things don't get 2 stars, but I won't go to town with why it got 2 stars, because there'll still be something positive about it.
Yeah.
And actually the author Robin Hobbs made an interesting, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, comment. She said that she felt with people who did 2-star reviews of her work, at least they'd finished reading it in most cases.
That's right.
So, because I think she got backed out because she did a 2-star review on someone else's thing, and she was saying, I finished it.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think it's a delicate area, and you've kind of got to make sure that, yeah, because it's public, you don't know who's reading it.
I think it's that question of like it is public, but it can sometimes feel private, and so sort of up to individual reviewers to remember that it's public and going to be seen by anyone. And I think we're all kind of adjusting to what it's like living in this world where you share things as if they're personal and going to be read by friends, but then they can be picked up and read in other ways too, like by academics who are studying you, for example.
And so sometimes in book club, books that we don't rate highly can create the most vigorous discussion.
Yeah.
That's why I always say that it's not always about liking a book. Yeah, sure, we all want to like a book, but at the end of the day, if you can have a really great discussion and drill down on certain things, that's kind of makes it a successful book.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I think someone told me, it might be an urban myth, they attributed it to George Bernard Shaw, this quote, that you don't read reviews, you measure them. So if a book's generating lots of discussion, that's the important thing, and that's a sign of you. So. Actually, there was a bit of research that came out about Goodreads reviews. It's just to do with America, but you could look at the number of Goodreads reviews, not ratings, reviews, I think, a book had, and you could multiply it by about 7 to get the sales figures, something like there was some kind of quite direct correlation between reviews and sales, and it didn't matter if they were good or bad, just the fact that it was being talked about was the link to how popular or how much of an impact the book was having. Should I? Oh yeah. I'm just reading Lauren's thing. That what are the benefits of reviewing books on Goodreads versus simply just rating them? I think one of the other differences is that it's quite easy to rate a book on Goodreads, and we're all prompted to do that. If you read on a Kindle, you can quite quickly enter the number of stars. But I think reviewing them is quite a different act. It's a reader who really cares is the one that writes a review. So in a way, looking at the reviews is a way to see what the most avid and passionate readers have to say about a book. And you would probably know much more than me about the category of Goodreads librarians, and there are kind of super users within the Goodreads website who are quite influential in that ecosystem, and they're often the ones who write the reviews. So I think I think there can be a little bit of a shaped environment, and looking at the way readers can influence other readers. I think those who write reviews end up being influential users on the site. Sorry, that wasn't very articulate. Yeah. Yeah, was that a question? Thanks.
Rosie. Any other questions or comments about Goodreads? I think it's frustrating how you were, yes, reading a lot of reviews in a lot of detail around a small number of items, but that did show these larger patterns. And that even 8% of people did say, oh, someone suggested it, and maybe some of the someones were the library. I think that is interesting that got mentioned. What to do to make sure more people say, oh, I got this suggested at the library.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting too when people take the time to show you how the book arrived in their life and, you know, that, yeah, I'd like to see more reviews like that too. See the different routes to readers and the patterns that get there, of how books get to readers. We get people to do it.
Online has commented that she has been showing the barcode scanning function of Want to Read to patrons so that they can help build their future readings. Yes. So that if you can't get it now, you can at least, it's in your Want to Read options.
Yeah.
I just had a question. How does a book find itself on Goodreads? How, what determines that it gets?
I think a reader has to. A reader has to upload it, and one of the things that I've tried to work with is that you can have different editions of a book on Goodreads. So something like the Rosie Project might have 15 different editions: the US one, the Australian one, the UK one. And I thought that could be really handy because then I could see who'd read the UK edition and who'd read the American one. But people don't tend to be accurate when they click which one they've read. I think they just click the first one they see, so it gets a bit jumbled with multiple editions up there. And but yeah, I think they all had to be uploaded by readers initially, although now that it's owned by Amazon, they've probably got some pipeline where every book that's on Amazon kind of can be found through Goodreads, I guess.
And Catherine made a comment that sometimes I find the reviews frustrating, too much preamble on what the book is about and not enough about what's good, bad, nothing about the book. And reviews on books that haven't been published yet and no pre-pub copies are available. Also the comment, the app doesn't make picking the right edition as easy as the web.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's interesting, finding the reviews frustrating, and perhaps that goes to the different purposes people write reviews for. But, I said 27% or whatever seem to address another reader and are trying to be useful, but some of them are more like a journal entry or someone's private record of their own reading experience, and maybe those aren't very good for other people to read. They're not very useful. They're sort of overly personal in that sense. So, yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost like it's not written for anyone else to read, and so it's frustrating to read because it doesn't have you in mind as a user of the review. Reviews on books that haven't been published yet is pretty interesting. And I think they tend to be disproportionately influential because, before you buy a book, you might check to see what its star rating is or how it's been reviewed. So they can go on to have a big effect. And if you can't check them against a copy yourself, or get access to a pre-publication copy yourself, then, that's maybe a bit of a place where the book industry isn't very transparent and there's the potential for, some not super ethical processes, reviewing processes. And I think those are often the reviews that authors get most upset about. If there's a bunch of negative one-star reviews before the book's even come out, you might feel very powerless as an author and frustrated. That's interesting. I haven't finished writing it yet, Catherine just said. Yeah. And I think sometimes people respond to hype about a book or what they think a book's going to be about, or if it's in a series, they're sort of responding to what they hope for in the series. So again, I think it's people taking that format of the review and really stretching it beyond what we've thought of reviews being in the past and using it for all different kind of social functions or personal functions.
Beth, what's the best way of us following your research?
The slides have my Twitter account. That's probably the best way. And my staff webpage has a list of my publications. It's a bit the pace of academic publishing is very slow, I'm afraid. So, you know, I do research and 2 years later the journal article appears. So, but yeah, people can always email me as well, and I can send pre-print copies. Oh, and then you can review them. No, I'm just but yeah, Twitter's probably the easiest way to stay in touch. It's how I met Ellen. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Beth. That was fabulous.
Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again for inviting me.